So in the spirit of this meeting, I'm going to start with a few disclaimers. So this is where I got to do the majority of the work in Miami. So yeah, this is where I am now. So we are just under the BT Tower. Is it this one? Yep. But you'll probably more importantly want to know, just over this road here is our little Tesco. So that's where we go. So Fly throughout this whole meeting have been going on about anniversaries and traditions and 10 years of the ICMS. But last night we had the first ever Pool World Cup, which Damien lost, I'm pleased to say. Michelle's not looking too happy, probably because of the amount of trash talking I was giving. But then he got his revenge and they shut me up accordingly. But if this talk isn't coherent, I'm going to blame Tiffany for taking us out after the pub. So, yeah. So my talk today is on HCN channels, so hyperpolarization activated cyclic nucleotide gated channels. And they do exactly what it says on the tin. They're opened by hyperpolarization, and they're modulated by cyclic nucleotides through this binding domain here. And they're permeable to both sodium and potassium. Some of the basic biophysical properties, so as we go to more hyperpolarized currents, voltages, we get an increase in current, and they're modulated by cyclic MP. So the addition of cyclic MP not only increases the current, it shifts the activation to more physiologically active voltages. So we were working on the interaction between the S4, the voltage sensor, and the pore domain and the coupling. So to kind of crudely show, we have the S4 moving down here, and it bends. And then as that moves down, the pore opens. So we were always looking at the differences between the classical potassium channels and how they do not open upon hyperpolarization, and why this might be the case with HCN and why there's such a weak coupling. And we put it down to this S4, S5 linker, so you get domain swapping with the classical channels, and we crudely say that, or think, that at hyperpolarized potentials, that is a steric block to prevent the S6 from opening, which with the shortened S4, S5 and HCM, that's able to do that. So we were always fascinated by this coupling, so we were looking for a new project, what to investigate, and we went through some of the old literature, and Gary Yellen's group, he showed that, so with typical HCN channels, when you apply cyclic MP, you get faster and larger currents with cyclic MP. But in the sea urchin model, so SBHCN, if you do not have cyclic MP, you get an inactivation. So it starts to open and then it inactivates. But with cyclic MP, this functions regularly. He showed that this was down to a mutation. So a phenylalanine mutated to a leucine, you can remove that inactivation. So this fascinated us. We wanted to know why that area. So we were looking, again, quite crudely at where do we think what's going to interact with that phenylalanine 459. So when we went through the literature, we found some mutations in epilepsy in that region. So this was particularly in early infantile epileptic encephalopathy. So what they showed with the homologous residue in HCN1, which is N305, so we were looking at N375, that they found originally there was a loss of function, but with the hetero, you could actually restore it back to wild type levels. Then Christopher Reed's group, they showed actually it's not a loss of function, it's just loss of voltage, and it's just permanently open. It's just constantly leaky as such, but voltage dependent. So we wanted to see, is the S4 domain playing a role in this? So we typically use voltage clamp photometry. So as Kay described yesterday, we attach a fluorophore to the top of the S4. Oh, sorry, we get a fluorophore to bind to a cysteine that we've incorporated, and we can measure the S4 movement whilst measuring current changes. So we looked at those two interacting residues in the SPHCN model, and what we found was whilst the current was always open across the voltages, the S4 moved similarly to the wild type channel, but with a slight shift, but nothing to worry about. So we put this down to what we incorporated, that we think that this sulfur aromatic interaction is absolutely crucial to the closing of HCN channels. So we kind of had this framed as a story. We went off to the biophysical meeting, and we were approached by a PhD student in Karina Nimogen's lab who looked petrified. And then we come to find out she was looking at exactly the same thing. But we then opened up a collaboration, and we worked together, and with them, we then looked at this compound, Propofol. So it's an anesthetic. It's quite a dirty compound. It seems to interact with a lot of things. But it's probably more famous because it's what killed Michael Jackson. So her whole project was to try and generate a cryo-EM structure of H3N1 with Propofol bound, trying to elucidate that binding site. And she did that very well. So she managed to create a series of structures. So we have the apostate here, which had a RMSD of less than 1 Armstrong. So it was very similar to what Rod McKinnon had previously found with the closed structure. So we were in a good starting point there. And with Propofol bound to the wild type channel, it highlighted 2 different sites. So we were interested to see what's actually going on at these sites. So we geniusly named them Site 1 and Site 2. And what we found with Site 1, it was in between the S5, S6, and it was about 20 Armstrongs from lipids, which fit with what Peter Goldstein had previously shown. So he anchored Propofol to the lipid membrane, and using a 20 Armstrong scaffold, that's where it found to have its highest effect. So we were in the same figure, or ballpark as that. So that made us quite excited. So there's hydrophobic interactions going on with the phenylalanine, the methionine. So we were on our way, and we'd already had the data from before to show that there are interactions. So what's going on with Propofol in those residues? Site 2 was a bit of a funny one. It was kind of out the way. It was not really doing anything. We thought it was a bit of a just an artifact of forcing into a cryo-EM. So we did sub-MD simulations with those 2 sites, and we ran this for 400 nanoseconds. And after some equilibration time, what we found is near enough all of them remained in Site 1, but they all left Site 2. So that was another sort of step to saying, okay, it looks like it's favouring Site 1 over Site 2. We then also did some molecular docking, and this generated 5 sites for docking. And one of the key thing here is Site 2 in the docking is not Site 2 from the cryo-EM structures. So the docking didn't actually go anywhere near Site 2 from our cryo-EM structures. But Site 1 is our Site 1. So again, we were happy with that in that same region. So, move, yep. So then when we reviewed the structures, both our HCN1 with Propofol bound and our APO structure, so in the closed state, we have this pocket that's open, that Propofol can get in and occupy. But in the open state, so in the HCN1 crosslink from McKinnon, and as well as Anna Moroni's HCN4 open state structure, that pocket is occluded and it's closed, so we don't think anything can get in there. So again, we were looking at the residues that were involved, so we went and did some 2-electrode voltage clamp, and what we found was we saw a shift of about 30 millivolts with Propofol binding to the wild type, but this was reduced in those mutations where we partially occluded that pocket. So we then looked at those disease-causing mutations. So the M305L, which was permanently open, when we applied Propofol, it goes back to a near wild-type looking channel, which was really impressive in our eyes. We were really excited by this. We also looked at 2 other mutations, so D401H and D401N, which have a less severe phenotype because they partially close, but they're more readily open than the wild-type channel. And again, what we saw when we applied Propofol, we got that restoration of channel closing to a near wild-type state. So we were all excited, what's going on? So then we looked at our Propofol with the mutated channel to see is it still binding in that same region. And from what we found from our structures, it was there. And again, we had really good RMSD, so less than 0.5 Armstrongs. So that was looking intact, and it looks like it's not affecting the S4 in any way. But we wanted to confirm that this restoration of voltage dependent isn't through the S4 and it's through actually pore closing. So the S4, S5s conserved highly throughout the HCM family, so SPH, which is our sea urchin model, which we use for voltage clamp fluorometry because it's far easier to generate and work with. So when we looked at the homologous mutation with the sea urchin model, we found that that S4 movement was exactly the, well, not exactly, but slightly shifted, but near enough wild type, looking with that open channel conformation across all voltages. We then played around with a load of different mutations, and it looked like it was residue specific to how much degree of closing you can get with that mutation there. So all of those had regular S4 movement. So we were saying, we come up with the hypothesis that methionine is crucial for that voltage dependence of closing in the sea urchin channel. So then we looked at the phenylalanine, the associated member, and again, we ran a whole series of different compounds, and with the exception of the tryptophan and the glutamine, which were non-functional, but they also had no fluorescence movements. We don't know if there's a trafficking issue there or if it's just a completely non-functioning channel. We need to look into that with more detail, but we found that it looks like that the more hydrophobic the residue, that plays a key role in that closing within that pocket. So we then did the reverse mutation, and what we got was a restoration of HCN-like current. It was reduced, but we did restore that current to close, albeit shifted towards a more positive potential. And then we looked at what Propofol is doing to the wild-type channel in the sea urchin on its own. And with that inhibited current, we still get S4 moving exactly the same. So it's not interacting with that S4 movement. It's the linkage between the voltage sensor and the pore. So we come up with this model that Propofol acts and binds within the closed state. So when the wild-type channel is closed, Propofol binds into that S5, S6 groove, and it enhances that coupling between the S4 and the S5 to prevent the channel from opening. Now, in the disease state, so the M305, the channel can't close. So when it's open, Propofol manages to get in there and then reintegrate that interaction and help form those salt bridges between 401 and restore that interaction between 389 and 305. So that's what we concluded. So yeah, Propofol inhibits that mechanistic hotspot in between S5 and 6, and it restores that voltage-dependent closing in both those epilepsy-associated polymorphisms. It's independent of the voltage sensor, and those mutations that are homologous in the sea urchin act in a similar manner to what we see with the HCN1 channel. So yeah, should acknowledge Lima, who's in the crowd. I'm a PhD student. We're a small lab, we're just getting started. The last in the lab where did the majority of the work, and also Elizabeth, who generated all the structures for us, and then the group at Cornell that were involved in the work. Any questions?
Thank you very much, and perfect timing. Questions? Yes, question there. Yeah.
Thank you. Very exciting talk, and sorry for raising hand. I'm most ignorant among all, I guess. So I have a question about the docking, especially when the ligand become very small or fragment size.
Yep.
Then is post-prediction how reproducible it becomes?
Yeah, we kind of just use that as a sort of an extra validation.
Yeah.
You know, we didn't start
Yeah.
with the docking. It was kind of more of a let's run it through the computer and see if it spits out anything like we're seeing in the structures.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions? I had a question. When I used to teach about general anesthetics, I said that Propofol worked on GABA-A receptors. Was I wrong, or does it just act on lots and lots of different receptors?
Quite a lot of channels and receptors, yeah. So
And similar affinity?
I haven't looked into GABA, so
Okay.
I can't answer that. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So we still don't really know how Michael Jackson died. Well, we do.
Is he dead?
It's not finished. Thank you very much.